All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're taking a really fascinating look at the chapter covering the demographic structure of Indian society. Now, I know it's incredibly easy to hear a word like demography and immediately think of dry math, boring spreadsheets, and, endless census forms. But I want to completely reframe that for you right now. Demography isn't just statistics, it's actually the living, breathing story of our society, told entirely through numbers. It captures our triumphs, our struggles, and ultimately, our future.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll quickly cover the science of demography, Malthus versus transition theory, key demographic indicators, India's age structure, and finally, the sex ratio crisis.
Okay, part one, the science of demography, counting heads to understand hearts.
Before we even look at the data, we have to ask a pretty basic question. Why do governments even bother counting us in the first place? Well, the word demography comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and graphein, meaning to describe. So it's literally the description of people. But what's absolutely crucial to understand here is that historically, the entire academic discipline of sociology actually owes its successful establishment to this exact practice. You see, as modern nation-states started forming, governments suddenly realized they needed to manage public health, policing, and taxation. And to do all that, they had to count their people. Now, the field basically splits into two main branches. Formal demography is the highly quantitative mathematical side. This is your hardcore spreadsheet math used for forecasting exactly how large a population will be. Social demography, on the other hand, is all about the why behind those numbers. It investigates the actual social, economic, or political causes and consequences of these population changes.
Charting the history of the census is pretty cool. It started with the modern American census back in 1790, but India actually has a remarkable journey here. The British Indian government began conducting censuses between 1867 and 1872, and that led to the first regular 10-yearly census in 1881. Independent India then proudly continued this tradition in 1951. And to put the sheer scale of this into perspective, because China doesn't conduct regular censuses in the same way, the Indian census is actually the largest exercise of its kind in the entire world. Literally no one else is counting that many people at once.
Moving right along to Section 2, Malthus versus transition theory, the great population debates. So, historically, theories about human population growth were, they were actually quite apocalyptic. Meet Thomas Robert Malthus. He was an English political economist who outlined a very famous and a very grim theory in his 1798 essay on population. And for a really long time, his incredibly pessimistic views shaped exactly how empires and economists looked at human life. The core of Malthus's argument was just pure math. He argued that human populations grow in a geometric progression, so 2, 4, 8, 16, multiplying super rapidly. But our ability to actually produce food only grows in an arithmetic progression, 2, 4, 6, 8, just slowly adding up. His ultimate conclusion? Humanity would always outbreed its food supply, permanently condemning the masses to poverty. Malthus genuinely believed that the power of population was vastly superior to the Earth's ability to produce subsistence. Because of this mathematical mismatch, he argued that positive checks, which is just a very academic way of saying terrible things like famines, epidemics, and plagues, were nature's inevitable way of balancing the scales. The only alternative in his mind was humans using preventive checks, like postponing marriage. He essentially stated that mass death was mathematically unavoidable unless people severely restricted their reproduction. Yikes, right? Thankfully for all of us, history proved Malthus completely wrong. The theory of demographic transition paints a much better picture. It maps population growth directly to economic development across three optimistic stages. In stage 1, an underdeveloped society has high birth rates and high death rates, so overall growth is low. Stage 2 is the famous population explosion. This is where modern medicine makes death rates plummet, but birth rates stay high. Finally, in stage 3, the society becomes developed, and growth stabilizes with low birth and low death rates. So it beautifully replaces Malthus's doom and gloom with a model of actual human progress. Okay, Section 3. Key demographic indicators, the toolkit. To really understand these broad transitions we just talked about, we need a few specific metrics. First up is the birth rate. It's a simple ratio, the total number of live births in an area over a year, divided by the total population in thousands. Whenever you hear this term, I just want you to think live births per 1,000 people. That's it. It just gives us a standardized way to compare different states and countries, no matter how big or small their total population is.
Similarly, the death rate is exactly what it sounds like, the number of deaths per 1,000 population. But what you really need to remember here is that historically, during that transition phase we outlined earlier, the death rate falls much, much faster than the birth rate. Medical advances and public health initiatives can control diseases pretty rapidly. But the social decision for families to have fewer children, that takes generations to adopt.
And that brings us to the rate of natural increase. This is simply the difference between the birth rate and the death rate. So why does this matter? Well, when this difference finally hits zero, a population has stabilized. This is called reaching the replacement level, and it is literally the holy grail for a stabilizing society. It means the brand new generation is exactly replacing the older one that is dying out. Perfect balance. Which brings us to Section 4, India's age structure, the demographic dividend.
Let's bring all these global theories home and look specifically at India. As the country goes through its transition, our age pyramid is fundamentally changing shape. Falling birth rates narrow the bottom of the pyramid, so fewer babies. Increasing life expectancy widens the top, so more elderly folks living longer. The result? It creates a massive bulge right in the middle, giving us a huge working age population. This is the famous demographic dividend, a massive engine for potential economic growth. But think about what this means for the intergenerational dependency ratio for a second. Does having a huge working youth and a growing elderly population create tension between the generations? Or does it actually forge stronger bonds of support? It's a huge question for our society.
Finally, Section 5, the sex ratio crisis, when demography reflects prejudice.
Now, while numbers can show us incredible economic progress, they can also shine a really harsh light on our deepest societal flaws. The source material presents a very sobering reality here. As many as 9 states and union territories in India have a child sex ratio of under 900 females for every 1,000 males. This explicitly tells us that demographic variables aren't just matters of government planning or neat economic charts. They are ultimately driven by deep, sometimes persistent social and cultural choices. A declining child sex ratio is a profound national concern. And looking at the state-level data brilliantly illustrates the stark regional contrasts within the country. You have an economically prosperous state like Haryana with an incredibly low child sex ratio of just 793. Contrast that with Kerala at 964, or Arunachal Pradesh, which has the highest at 972. It completely shatters the myth that just having sheer economic wealth automatically equates to social equity. The numbers here force us to ask some really hard questions about persistent cultural preferences.
So, I want to leave you with this thought. If demographic data is indeed a mirror reflecting society, what do our numbers actually reveal about our values? We've explored how populations transition, how economic dividends are created, and how, sadly, prejudices can persist. The numbers are out there for all of us to see, but it's the very human choices behind those numbers that write the true story. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the explainer today. Keep questioning the data and keep learning.